Hi, I'm Nick Paulson. You're watching News 24 Live. I'm joined in studio once again by Harry Phillips from Health 24 to give us the latest on the Ebola outbreak. Harry, good day. What have you got for us this week?
Well, again, it's a tale of sort of two countries. We've got America, which is where all the exposure is, and we've got Africa, where the real problem is. So in America, it was all looking good last week, but then a doctor arrived back. He'd been treating patients in West Africa. He managed to slip through the new improved screening protocols at JFK Airport, and then he went bowling, and then he suddenly realized, I'm not feeling too hot. And America had another case of Ebola. Promptly went into a pretty massive panic. They seem to have calmed down a bit now. There was some very strict quarantine procedures they decided to enact, which is 21 days in a medical facility if you've been treating anyone. And then the White House came out and said, well, we're quite concerned that this is going to put off all of the doctors from going to West Africa and helping people. And this comes as the World Bank say they need 5,000 more healthcare workers to even control the thing. So that seems to have dialed back a bit and calmed down. On the African front, where the real problem is, the real development this week is we've got a case in Mali. Now, Mali has quite an extensive border with Guinea. So it's only really a matter of time until they got one. But that's probably going to be the big focus now, is to really control that before it spreads. Because as we know, the resources in West Africa are already far overstretched. So if they have to deal with another country, with another outbreak, it's going to be pretty bad.
In West Africa, is Ebola affecting the response to other health issues in the area? I mean, surely it must be.
Yeah, so these are, as we know, countries that are pretty poor, don't have particularly well-developed health systems. So there are a lot of other diseases. TB and malaria are massively prevalent, cause a lot of deaths. I mean, these places still have quite regular cholera outbreaks. And now Ebola really has shot to priority number one. And all of these diseases, they're still occurring just as much as they were before. But if there's no space in the hospital for Ebola patients, there isn't space in there for a TB or malaria patient either. And so there's not a lot of data on it, but it seems to be the case that those illnesses are now also on the rise, and then it just produces sort of a complete nightmare for the healthcare systems there.
In terms of the Western first world countries, obviously America is on high alert, they're doing a lot. What about the rest of Europe, United Kingdom? I mean, I find it quite ironic that America is obviously always the first to go and help out, sends these armed forces, and now they're like, no, don't come back, get quarantined for 21 days.
Yeah, it's a bit shady. Europe is, as usual, a bit more relaxed. They've had a couple of cases. There's the two guys who died in Spain. We've had another nurse in Spain, and a case in the UK. One guy died in Germany. They're not as panicked. They've got more lax rules. They seem to have accepted there will be a few cases there, but they're all just focused on when there is a case, isolate the person, see who they've been in contact with, and sort it out. So they don't seem too worried, and they are starting to contribute more to the response.
Speaking of first world countries, Australia have made an interesting move. I read yesterday that they have put a blanket ban on granting visas to anybody from West Africa that hasn't gone down too well. No. And I mean, what about West Africans that actually haven't spent any time in West Africa for the last couple of years?
No, exactly. It does seem like a pretty ill thought through idea. Australia as a whole has always been very strict on immigration. I mean, you can't take untreated wood into the country, for example. They're very strict. And this has obviously not been popular. And we have to bear in mind that even if we go with a very high number of cases, it's still less than sort of 2% of the population of these countries, and now none of them can go there. So it's not popular, it's not fair, but it's also not surprising.
And Harry, final question, these purported numbers about the increase in the amount of cases, is it still a progressive thing, and how much worse is it going to get if and when it gets better?
Yeah, it's probably going to get a lot worse. They think they recently discovered patient 0, which is the person who started this outbreak, which was a 2-year-old toddler in Guinea. And that was December 2013. So it's coming up to a year ago now. And the growth up until sort of middle of the year was pretty slow. And now if you look at a graph, it's sort of like the hockey stick sort of worry. And that's really sort of worrying. You've got the most recent estimate. The worst case scenario from the WHO is 1.4 million cases by the end of January. And if you even go with the most friendly death rate of 50%, that's well over 500,000 people dead by January 2015. So that is a serious worry. An interesting thing which came out, which may have contributed to this, is they found out that West Africa actually has a very small percentage of people with HIV/AIDS. And when that epidemic sort of came to light, became an area of international focus, they didn't get much interest because they didn't have much of the disease. And as a result, they didn't get much investment in their healthcare. So they've had no chance to upgrade their systems, and now they're suddenly trying to catch up. So until they can do that, and the vaccine appears to have been pushed back by about another 3 months, until they can do that, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. There's no sort of sign of it being under control anytime soon.
It's an interesting point you make. I mean, South Africa also obviously has its own problems with HIV, with tuberculosis in particular. How is the awareness around Ebola and the potential threats sort of going to affect health around those conditions, those diseases and viruses?
Yeah, it's okay at the moment until there's a case here, if there's a case here. And when that happens, there's a lot of misinformation. And I mean, many of the symptoms of early TB mimic the symptoms of Ebola. And it's likely there will be a lot of co-interaction, a lot of panic. And it's going to be the job of the healthcare services to try and filter what is Ebola, what's not Ebola, and stop all of this sort of explosion of healthcare system issues that we're seeing in West Africa.
All right, thank you.
Absolute pleasure.